Hello, folks. So, in this video, I'm continuing the previous thing that I was doing, which is building this guessing game. So now we are actually being told to actually start writing the program, and they're giving us the program. So processing a guess. The first part of guessing game program will ask for user input, process that input, and check that the input is in the expected form. So to start, we'll allow the player to input a guess, enter the code in listing 2.1 into source main dot rs rust. You can copy it like this, or we can copy it like this, and it'll say copy. And you can just put this in. And here you can actually see them mentioning, okay, code that gets a guess from the user and prints it to. When you read this through, it says guess the number. Okay, it shows guess the number, and then it says please input your guess, and then it says guess. There's a let, and then there's a mutate or mutable. Okay, and then there is a guess. This is of type string. So standard input, read line, and then expect. So we need to understand what this is. I think this is kind of like an error of sorts. Um, Okay, and then it says you guessed this. So we can actually read through what this means. So this code contains a lot of information. So let's go over it line by line. And so to obtain user input and then print the result as output, we need to bring the IO input output library into scope. So IO is short for input output. So bring as in import it. So and the IO library comes from the standard library known as STD. So STD is short for standard. So use or import basically STD colon colon IO. By default, Rust has a set of items defined in the standard library that it brings into the scope. Okay, so it has a set of defined items that are defined in the standard library that it brings into the scope of every program. Okay, so looks like it brings it to every program, this thing, some set of things, some set of items defined in the standard library. This set is called this set of items. It's called the prelude, and you can see everything in it in the standard library documentation. Okay, so here we are looking at Rust-Lang documentation, STD, standard library, and it goes to the prelude and then index. So if we actually just simply type std, it goes to this, and you can actually see Rust standard library. This as foundation of portable Rust software, a set of minimal and battle tested shared abstractions for the broader Rust ecosystem. So it offers core types like vector. I think this is vector. Option, library defined operations on language primitives, standard macros, and so these are the macros that we have. I think println is one of them, and then input output, multi-threading, and many other things, among many other things. So is available to all Rust crates by default. So therefore, the standard library can be accessed in use statements through the path std, as in use std env. This is for the environment variables, I think. So how to read this documentation? If you already know the name of what you're doing, what you're looking for, the fastest way to find it is to use the search bar at the top of the page. Okay. And otherwise, you may want to jump to one of these useful sections. So standard library modules. So these are the modules, and there's a prelude. And then primitive types, standard macros, and then the Rust prelude. So if this is your first time, the documentation for the standard library is written to be casually perused. Clicking on interesting things should generally lead you to interesting places. Still, there are important bits you don't want to miss. So read on for a tour of the standard library and its documentation. Once you're familiar with the contents of the standard library, you may begin to find the verbosity of those of the prose distracting. So at this stage in your development, you may want to press the summary button near the top of the page to collapse it into a more skimmable view. So, okay, so this is the summary. So, primitive types, modules, and then macros, and then keywords. Okay, so what is this? Self TY, I don't know what that means. Okay. Um, Show all and so while you're looking at the top of the page, also notice the source link. Rust's API documentation comes with the source code and you're encouraged to read it. The standard library source is generally high quality and a peek behind the curtains is often enlightening. What is the standard library documentation? So this Rust standard library is divided into a number of focused modules, all listed further down this page. Okay, so these modules are the bedrock upon which all of Rust is forged, and they have mighty names like Slice, CMP. Modules documentation typically includes an overview of the module along with examples and are a smart place to start familiarizing yourself with the library. Second, implicit methods are on primitive types are documented here. This can be a source of confusion for two reasons. While primitives are implemented by the compiler, the standard library implements methods directly on the primitive types, and it is the only library that does so. Okay, so the standard library implements methods directly on the primitives, which are documented in the section on primitives. The standard library exports many modules with the same name as primitive types. These define additional items related to the primitive type, but not the all important methods. So, for example, there is a page for the primitive type I32, integer 32-bit, that lists all the methods that can be called on a 32-bit integers, very useful. And there's a page for the module I standard I32. Okay, primitive I32 and then module I32. The documents is constant values, min, max, very rarely useful. Okay, so hey, deprecation plan. So that is some max value. Okay, and note the documentation for the primitives, string, and then also called slice, many methods, call on string, vector are actually calls to methods on string and slice, respectively, via deref coercions. So dereference, I think, coercions. So something to read later. Third, the standard library defines the Rust prelude, a small collection of items, mostly traits, that are imported into every module of every crate. The traits in the prelude are pervasive, making the prelude documentation a good entry point to learning about the library. And finally, the standard library exports a number of standard macros and lists them on this page. Technically, not all the standard macros are defined by the standard library. Some are defined by the compiler, but they're documented here the same. Okay, so some are defined by the compiler, some are defined by the standard libraries. Like the prelude, the standard macros are imported by default into all crates. Okay. Um, so there are standard macros, and then there are standard, and then there's a prelude. Okay. Contributing changes to the documentation, a tour of REST, standard library, and platform abstractions. Use before and after main. Okay. So many parts of the are expected to work before and after main, but this is not guaranteed or ensured by tests. It is recommended that you write your own tests and run them on each platform you wish to support. This means that use of standard STD before or after main, especially of features that interact with the OS or global state, is exempted from stability and portability guarantees, and instead only provided on a best effort basis. Nevertheless, bug reports are appreciated. On the other hand, core and alloc are most likely to work in such environments with the caveat that any hookable behavior such as SpanX, out-of-memory handling, or allocators will also depend on the compatibility of the hooks. Some features may also behave differently outside main, STDIO could become unpreferred, some panics might turn into awards, backtraces might not get symbolicated or similar. Interesting. Some difference in how things work. So that is that, and we can actually go to the source over here apparently. And so that's the source, standard library, and my battery is gonna die. So I'm just gonna go ahead and press pause over here and then recharge before I continue. Okay, so looks like I can actually continue already. So yeah, once we look at this, we can actually understand the standard library. Oh, okay, one moment. I might have to stop now and I'll come back later.